All right, question. What is your favorite summer food? What is your favorite summer food? For some of you, it's something very, very simple, something as simple as sliced watermelon. For some of you, you get to summer and something just a tiny bit more complex, something like a caprese salad, thinly sliced tomatoes, mozzarella cheese, garnished with basil, drizzled with olive oil and balsamic vinaigrette. But what is your favorite summer food? Audience participation time. If you are with a family member or with friends, or even if there's a total stranger sitting a couple rows away, share with them your favorite summer food. Go. All right. All right, that's all. You don't need to share the recipe. Just potato salad. That's all we need. A question: Did any of you mention strawberry shortcake? Anybody? It's interesting that you mentioned that because, give me just a couple seconds here. This won't take long. Mrs. Raymond would ask me in the 6th grade, Jeff, did you bring some to share with all the class? And the answer is the same for her as you. Nope. I'm sorry, give me just a second here. Strawberry shortcake. What if there's a connection between the goodness of the food and the generosity of God? What if we're supposed to find a connection between the goodness of the food that we eat and the kindness and the generosity of God? As we taste of a delicious meal, what if we are to taste also of the kindness and the generosity of the Creator? And this concept, it comes from a story that takes place right there, the town of Lystra, a small city of Lystra. Now, this is just a little basic map of the first missionary journey of a person in the Bible known as the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul and a sidekick, Barnabas, they take off from Syrian Antioch, travel to the island of Cyprus, then travel north to what is now the country of Turkey, and they go from Pisidian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. Our story today takes place in the town of Lystra. And they're traveling, they're not tourists, they're traveling because they're carrying a message. In fact, the term that they use for the message is the good news. We use the word gospel. The word gospel means good news. It's about 48 AD. And what 48 AD means is if the crucifixion of Jesus, if the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus took place sometime around 30 AD, this is 48 AD. It's like 20 years has passed. Less than 20 years has passed since the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, which means that it was, relatively speaking, a current event. And it also means that as they're traveling and as they walk into a town and as they gather an audience and they begin to speak about the good news about the fact that Jesus came for us. This is good news. It's good news that when we could not reach up to God, God reached down to us. It's good news because God doesn't love you because you're good. He loves you because he's good. It's a message of the kindness, grace, and generosity of God. They're spreading this message as they travel. And when they get to Lystra, Paul has this opportunity, the Apostle Paul has this opportunity to talk about the relationship between the goodness of the food and the kindness of God. Because as we taste the goodness of the food, it is to be a reflection of the kindness and generosity of God. So who cares? I mean, why should this matter to us? What difference does this make? I think it should make a difference to us because in our culture, so many of us, most of us, don't struggle with having adequate clothing or having enough food. Our question is what we're going to eat the next day, not whether or not we'll eat the next day, right? And so in a culture where we have food in abundance, I believe that we can grow numb or fall asleep, when it becomes to the numb or even bored to the daily expressions of God's goodness through something as simple as a meal. And so it is my hope that this message, this conversation today will awaken us once again to the kindness of God. For those of us who have an abundance of food around us, we can become numb or even bored to God's goodness. I hope that today can serve to wake us up to the daily gestures of God's goodness. It's also an important conversation today because I know there's a sliver of us, a smaller cross-section, who have experienced tragedy, grief, loss, or deep, deep disappointment. In fact, it's a small miracle that you got out of bed and found your way here today or turned on your computer to watch online because you feel almost incapacitated. The disappointment or loss you've suffered has left you feeling almost paralyzed and almost inability to function from day to day. And I think it is so important to take something as simple as the meal that sits in front of you and to be able to say, what if God, even in the middle of this tragedy, even in the middle of this gaping loss, what if God is showing me gestures of his goodness and his kindness and his generosity day after day after day? Listen to me. I believe that those who recognize the daily blessings that God is sending their way, even in the middle of a crisis, I believe we heal faster. Now, this will not take grief away, but I think it can soften grief and speed the healing process simply through the activity of recognizing the kindness of God that falls into our life in these 100 gestures of his goodness. I think this is a very important conversation because we can grow numb or even bored with the food that surrounds us. And secondly, for those of us in a series of severe trial, I think this can speed our grief and soften our grief as we recognize God's goodness. First part of the last century, there's this preacher and writer. His name was A.W. Tozer. He's been gone for a while, but some of you might remember the writings of A.W. Tozer, many of his books still in print. And Tozer is famous for making this statement. He says, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. What if he's right? What if what comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you? This is huge for our conversation today because if you see God fundamentally as unkind and miserly, then you will relate to God, and I would suggest to other people, in a certain way. Conversely, if your view of God, if what comes into your mind when you think of God is generous, kind, and gracious, if that is what comes to your mind, I believe that you will relate to God and relate to people in a completely different way. What if what comes into your mind when you think of God is one of the most important things about you? And so this conversation about the generosity of God is huge if it is to be believed. And it is the topic that the Apostle Paul talks about when he is traveling 48 AD-ish and ends up in the city of Lystra. So Jeff, okay, got it. I get it. Paul goes to Lystra and he begins to talk to them about food and its relationship to the goodness of God. No. Actually, he does, but just not yet. We'll get to that part in a minute. If you have a Bible, I'd love you to find Acts, A-C-T-S, Acts chapter 14. And then in verse 8, you would jump in with these words. It said, now in Lystra, there sat a man who was lame, and he had been that way from how long? From birth, and had never walked. He listened to Paul as he was speaking. So Paul goes into Lystra, apparently in some setting, maybe a marketplace or a courtyard. He's teaching, and there's a guy dialed into what Paul is saying, and it says that he was unable to walk, and he had been this way from birth. His entire life had been witnessing the world from an altitude of about 2 feet. Now, we don't know whether the guy was from a rich family or a poor family. It's possible that his inability to walk meant that he was a beggar. It's possible he came from an affluent family and there were servants that carried him everywhere he needed to go. But we know that he is a man, he is of adult age, and yet he watches other kids run, something that he has never done. If he sees a wedding takes place and sees people dance, it's something that he has never done. And he's watching Paul, he's listening to Paul as the Apostle Paul is talking about the crucified, resurrected Jesus, saying, okay, now Paul talks about food and the goodness of God. No, that will come later. Something else happens here. Paul looked directly at him. It's not only the guy sees Paul sees him seeing him, looked directly at him, saw that he had the faith to be healed, and called out, this is a weird and wonderful and wild story, stand up on your feet. At that, the man what? Jumped up and he began to walk. Now, this is a grade A, bona fide miracle. And the fact that this guy is from Lystra, I mean, this isn't Paul and Barnabas traveling and they've got this ringer with them to jump up at the appropriate time. People from Lystra knew this guy from childhood. They had never seen him taking a walking step. And so the crowd here is startled. Now, if you have a copy of the Bible, do not read what is next. Or if you're seeing the text on the device that you have, don't read what's next. I just want you to think, what will happen now? Paul's been talking about Jesus. Yeah, whatever. All of a sudden, guy from your town that has never walked begins to walk. What will happen next? What I suspect will happen next is that people will rush around and they say, okay, circle back to that Jesus thing you were talking about. I was mildly interested before, but if people who are disabled who've never walked are now walking, okay, dial back. I want to hear more about this Jesus thing. That's what will happen next, right? No. Welcome to Lystra. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, the gods have come down to us in human form. Now, Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes because he was the chief speaker. Hermes, the messenger of the gods. Now, and they're speaking this, anyone paying attention, what language? In the Lycaonian language. And Paul was a little rusty on his Lycaonian, so he doesn't know. I think Paul was fluent in 5 languages. As a Roman citizen, he spoke and read Latin. Being in the Greek world, he spoke Greek. He was from Tarsus, which was in Cilicia. His indigenous language was Cilician. And being a good Jewish leader, he spoke Hebrew and Aramaic. So Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, and Cilician. But I don't think he was fluent in in Lycaonian, the slacker. And so Paul and Barnabas, as these people are yelling, hey, this is Zeus, this is Hermes, they're not really picking up on this, and they don't know what's going on. Now it says, then the priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought bowls and wreaths to the city gates because he and the crowd wanted to offer sacrifices to them. Now I suggest to you that this was not the reaction that Paul and Barnabas were looking for when they entered the city of Lystra. If you want to go, welcome to their world. Welcome to their world, the world of the Greek and Roman gods. Now, little bit of information here that you may or may not find interesting, but I find kind of fascinating. There was an ancient author by the name of Ovid, and Ovid wrote this book called Metamorphosis. And his task in Metamorphosis was to write about the legends and the myths relating to the Greek and Roman gods. And so one of Ovid's stories in Metamorphosis, and the story takes place in the region around Lystra, the very area that Paul and Barnabas are going to. The legend went like this, that one day Zeus and Hermes traveled to that region in order to see what the population was really like, but they didn't come dressed as the gods, they came dressed as beggars, took on the appearance of beggars. And they go from house to house to house to house, begging for hospitality, shelter, and food. And as they went among the populace as beggars, door after door after door is slammed in their face until they get to the house of an elderly couple. The guy's name is Philemon. His wife's name is Bacchus. And even though Philemon and Bacchus are old and kind of poverty class, they open their doors, they welcome them in, they only have a little bit of food, but what food they have, they share with these 2 beggars, and then suddenly Zeus and Apollo reveal themselves for the gods that they are, and the entire area is punished with a flood that wipes out the region except for the home of Bacchus and Philemon because they recognized and honored the gods. This was a legend from the region of Lystra. Here is a guy that's disabled. He stands up, that's walking, and the lesson behind Ovid's Metamorphosis legend is this: if the gods ever visit you in human form, you, baby, had better honor them. And they're ready to offer sacrifices to Paul and Barnabas, saying, the gods have come down. Now, it's happening in Lycaonian. Paul and Barnabas, they'll pick up on what's happening. When they figure this out, they are horrified. It literally says that they rip their clothes and they run into the crowd to try to get them to stop. It's what we find. Friends, why are you doing this? We are only human. We're not gods. We're only human like you. But we are bringing you what? 2 words. Bringing you good news, right? Telling you to turn from these worthless things to the living God. Here we go. We turn a corner here. Who made what? Who made the heavens, meaning the sky, and the earth, and the sea, and everything in them. Little sermon continues. In the past, he let all nations go their own way, yet he has not left himself without what? One word. He has not left himself without testimony. The word testimony there is like court evidence. Like you bring testimony in court. He says, listen, God has left you evidence all around you of his character, of his kindness, and his goodness. And so what evidence has God left? Here we go, right here. He has shown kindness to you by giving you 4 things. By giving you rain from heaven, crops in their season, he provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy. Rain, crops, food, joy. And right about now, some of you are going like, I remember this. If you do, some years ago, we looked at this passage of scripture on this brief couple sentence sermon on the kindness of God expressed in rain, crops, food, and joy. And my dear friends, we are so in need of a refresher course. So 4 words, say the 4 words out loud with me. Ready? Rain, crops, food, joy. So consider rain. Rain is life. Drought is death. Rain is life. No rain, no strawberries, no apples, no watermelon, no grain, which means no bread. Rain is life. He says he has shown you his kindness. God, the creator of our world, has shown you his kindness by sending you rain. And when the rain falls upon the soil, the seeds that have planted germinate and they begin to grow. Word number 2 is crops, the crops that grow. And word number 3 is food. You think, well, crops are food. Sort of. The crops that grow, we take them, we mix them, we blend them, we process them together in order to come up with combinations of flavors and textures that are far more brilliant than the original objects. I mean, a crop is strawberries, and strawberries are wonderful, but we blend those strawberries with a cake and cream that is whipped, and we come up with a combination that is trust me, it's pretty good. I mean, listen, you can crops. You can gnaw on a head of lettuce if you want to. You can just take a bite out of a head of lettuce, okay? And you can chew on a carrot, but tear up the lettuce, thinly sliced carrots. Chop some onions, take some blue cheese, make a blue cheese dressing, and suddenly you have a summer salad, which is fundamentally different in flavor and texture than if you simply ate some lettuce and then chewed on a carrot and then ate an onion and downed a block of blue cheese. It's the creative combination that creates food. I mean, and they experienced the same thing back in the day. I mean, there's bread, you eat bread, but then there's herbs. You can chew on some herbs. There's olive oil. You could, I guess, drink it if you wanted to, but take the fresh bread and dip it in olive oil mixed with herbs, and now you have something called a meal. combination of flavors and textures. And this brings something else, word number 4, which is joy. Rain, crops, food, joy. And I think when Paul talks about joy in the context of the rain that falls, the crops that we harvest, the meals that we make, I think it is the joy of dining in the company of others in a way that not only fills the stomach, but satisfies the soul. Dining, having pleasure in a meal in a way that not only feeds the body, but also feeds the spirit. Now, get the context again. Paul is ranting this message in a public square to try to prevent them from offering like animal sacrifices to them, thinking they're the gods come to earth, Zeus and Hermes. And Paul says, listen, God has not left you without evidence of his kindness. He has shown you his kindness by giving you rain, crops, food, and joy, gestures of the kindness of God. So I have a homework assignment for you. It's a very detailed homework assignment. Ready? As you taste the corn on the cob, slathered in butter, taste also of the kindness and generosity of God. As you pull ribs from the smoker and cover them with barbecue sauce, and as you gnaw on those ribs and taste the flavors, taste also of the goodness and kindness of the Creator who set these things in motion. Jeff, man, you're a step ahead of me because I don't even know that there's God out there. Okay, let me take 30 seconds to prove the existence of God. You're walking down the channel at Grand Haven, and you pause, a very small shack of a place, and purchase a Pronto Pup. Coat it with mustard or ketchup or both. Your choice. Now, before you take a bite of this delicacy, pause, look out at the water, seeing the boats traveling back and forth on the channel, and take a bite of this culinary miracle. Close thine eyes, lift thy face heavenward, and confess there is a God. I know, some of you are going to need more than a corn dog to prove the existence of God. Okay. S'mores? All right. The crisp graham cracker, the toasted marshmallow, the melting Hershey's chocolate bar. Don't pray yet. Hold off. Take a bite of these mingled flavors. And now, before your second bite, pause to pray. God is great. God is good. Let us thank him for the food. Let us thank him for our food. I know we're having some fun with this, but why do we need this? We need this because when we're surrounded by food, the heart can grow numb and cold and bored with the simple daily provision of the Creator. That's why we need this. We need this because sometimes traveling through a season where the life is getting crushed out of us, where joy is getting crushed out of us, even in that challenging season of disappointment, grief, or loss, God may meet us with daily gestures of his kindness and recognizing that kindness, chronicling our blessings as they drop into our life. I believe it can soften the grief and help speed our passage to laughter and fuller joy. I think we need to remember the wonder of corn on the cob and ribs and a Pronto Pup and s'mores, because what if one of the most important things about you is what comes to your mind when you think about God? What if A.W. Tozer is right? That what enters your mind when you think of God is the most important thing about you. And if you view God as unkind, ungracious, and stingy, you will relate to him and other people in a certain way. And if you see him as kind and generous, you will relate to him in a completely different way. Rain, crops, food, joy. Say it with me again. Ready? Rain, crops, food, joy. Now, so yeah, dude, that's kind of general. I mean, corn on the cob, the kindness of God. I mean, that's about as general. It doesn't tell you about the 10 Commandments. It doesn't tell you about what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, forgive your enemy. Jesus said, the Lord's Prayer. It's just really, really general. It's exactly what it is. In fact, there's a whole branch of theology that's called general revelation. There's a different branch of theology that's called special revelation. Now, general revelation is sometimes called natural revelation, and special revelation is sometimes called specific revelation, but it's the same thing. Revelation is that which God reveals to us about himself, who he is and what he desires of us. This is revelation, that which God reveals about himself. General revelation is just basic stuff that people can see, from a sunrise and a sunset and a flowing stream and walking down a mountain trail. It's the food that we eat, the summer salad, the hamburger. It's just very general in nature. Special revelation or specific revelation is the way that we believe God communicates to us through the scriptures and through the person of Christ. Now, this is my Bible. We tend to call the Bible God's Word. My belief is that it not only reflects the ideas, concepts of a human author, but there is a divine author. There's God's authorship behind it. It's like the Spirit of God breathes into and through the book. And so when we open the scriptures together and say the Apostle Paul wrote, the Apostle Paul said, I believe that God is revealing something about himself through the pages, through the stories, through the verses, through the power of the scriptures. And so this is not general, this is significantly more specific. And also, when Jesus was here, he would say things to his disciples like, he would say, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. That is, watch me and you will see what God the Father is thinking. Listen to what I say about hypocrisy, and you will know how God the Father views hypocrisy. Listen to what I say about religion for show that doesn't really touch and transform the heart, and you will know how God the Father feels and what he thinks about religion for show. Listen to what I say about compassion for people who've had the life crushed out of them, and you will see how God the Father, what he feels and how he thinks about compassion for people who have had the life crushed out of them. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Jesus would also say, the words I speak to you are not my own. I only speak what the Father tells me to speak. And so this is special revelation. God reveals himself in the person of Christ. The reason why I think this is so important for us is that I encounter so many people who love general revelation and are unwilling to take steps to continue the journey toward special revelation. So let me tell you what this sounds like so you will know it when you hear yourself saying it or when you hear someone else saying it. Someone will say, I hear the whisper of God when I sit on the end of a dock in the early morning or late evening in an inland lake. That is where I experience the voice and the whisper of God. Are you ready? And we should. That's one of the ways God reveals his goodness, his kindness, and his generosity. My question is this, but what if he has more to say? right? There are individuals who say, I hear the voice of God when I take a walk into a forest and experience God's nature. The forest is my cathedral. That is where I hear his voice. And we should. But what if he has more to say? So many of you experience the presence of God as you walk beside an ocean or along the shore of Lake Michigan, and you just sense a closeness to God. Here we go. And we should, because we are experiencing revelation. He's revealed himself. But what if he has more to say? Those of you that come in special contact, connection, hear the voice of God, especially when you're in a natural setting, my challenge for you is enjoy that moment where God meets you and visits you, but don't let the journey end there. My take on this is that general revelation was given to us to call us, to lead us to more specific revelation. Graphically, something like this, that the general revelation, our enjoyment of fruits, vegetables, nature, we're supposed to see the kindness of God there, and it was to draw us and lead us to the kindness of God here. But both are a generosity story, the story of nature and the story of the cross, the self-giving of Christ. Both are a mercy story, both are a story of the generosity of God. The general revelation should call us to special revelation. Now, in that sermon in Lystra, the Apostle Paul speaking to the people from Lystra, and he says, listen, God has set evidence, testimony all around us, like testimony in court. He has shown you his, and what word did he use? He has shown you his, began with a K, that's your clue. He has shown you his kindness by giving you rain, crops, food, joy. The same word is used, kindness, for the crucifixion. Did you know that? Now, not in Lystra. It's an occasion where Paul, he's an older pastor, is writing to a younger pastor by the name of Titus. Titus is leading a Jesus community on the island of Crete. And Paul writes to him and says, no, Titus, I just want you to never forget something. I don't want you to ever forget how messed up we were. And not just people out there. He means how messed up we were. The human condition can be really nasty and really awful, and we were part of that. And then he says this, but when we were so messed up, listen, Titus chapter 3, but when the kindness and love of God our rescuer appeared, God our Savior, Titus remembers something. He saved us. He rescued us, not because of righteous things we had done, but because of his mercy. Titus, remember something. God is kind. God is loving. God is merciful. He was generous with us. And when we were absolutely lost, his kindness and love set in motion the coming and the self-giving of Christ to take our place and to rescue us. See, both the agricultural products in the story of the cross. It's like different chapters in the same book on God's generosity, on God's kindness, and one is to lead us to another. I took a break from cartoons for about 15 years. What happened is my little kids grew and outgrew cartoons. And then with the presence of now 3 small grandchildren, I am being re-indoctrinated into all things Pixar and Disney, or Pixar Disney. And so it was at the beginning of the summer that I was snuggled in with a certain 3-year-old boy for whom I have deep fondness. And we were watching Finding Dory together. Have you seen Finding Dory? Any of you? Okay, 2 of you. Wonderful. It's a movie. And Finding Dory is about a fish named Dory. And Dory is afflicted with short-term memory loss. Dory forgets everything. And so at the beginning of the story, Dory's parents, knowing that she will probably get lost and not be able to remember how to get home, they create a trail of shells leading out from their house. And mom and dad tell their daughter, If you ever forget how to get home, follow the trail home. If you get lost, follow the trail home. And Dory gets terribly lost, gets into another area of the ocean. Near the end of the movie, gets at least in the region where her mom and dad live, and she sees a shell, and then another shell. Remembers the trail of shells. And she follows the trail of shells back to the submerged tire, which is her family's home. And then the camera pans out, and you see that her mom and dad have made trails in every direction. These trails just radiate from the house. And I believe in the core of my being that God has set out a trail of generosity for us to follow the shells and find our way home. I believe that with every sunrise and every sunset and with every summer salad and with every bacon cheeseburger, God is saying, follow the trail of my kindness. Follow the trail to me, follow the trail home. And we need this because we get numb or bored with the daily gestures of God's goodness, and we forget and lose our way. Or in certain seasons, we become so hurt that we can't even see straight. And there's a trail of shells. A trail that we need because we get lost and we lose our way. And so, as you taste the goodness of your food, taste also of the kindness, goodness, creativity, and generosity of your God. And follow the trail to Him. Follow the trail back home. Gracious God, we give thanks for this day. We give thanks that we could gather in each other's company and open your word and soak it in. Meet us this week. Meet us this week as we enjoy your goodness that drops around us in 100 unexpected ways. And may the journey lead to your doorstep. We ask this in the name of Jesus, who came here for us. Amen. We'll see you next week.